Nestled amidst rolling hills and tall trees, the lake shimmered like a hidden gem, captivating everyone who set their eyes upon it. Its clear waters sparkled under the golden sun, and soft breezes carried the sounds of gentle lapping waves against rocky shores. This picturesque spot was much more than just a scenic view. It served as a beloved gathering place for families, friends, and local wildlife that on weekends, laughter would mingle with the songs of birds as picnics were held on its banks, while children splashed joyfully in its depths. The community surrounding the lake understood its ecological significance. It was part of a larger network of waterways that supported diverse ecosystems. Lilipads floated serenely, while fish darted beneath the surface, forming food chains essential to the area's biodiversity. Not only did the lake provide habitat for countless species, but it also served as a critical resource for local farmers and gardeners who relied on its clean waters for irrigation. The flora and fauna depended on this pristine environment, thriving in harmony with residents who cherished their connection to nature. Yet beyond its beauty and utility, the lake held deep cultural importance. Stories of community gatherings, environmental education programs, and even festivals celebrating its splendor filled the hearts of residents. It was an integral thread in the fabric of their lives, a source of pride that united them in stewardship and appreciation for the natural world. But like all fragile treasures, the lake's safety depended on vigilance and care. The looming threat of pollution represented not just an environmental risk, but a potential fracture in the community's bond with their cherished landmark. Little did they know that this previously serene haven would soon find itself tangled in a web of turmoil. Thanks to careless actions that would have devastating consequences, as summer faded into fall, whispers of distress began to ripple across the calmed surface of the lake, signs that would herald an unfolding crisis. Karen was a familiar face in the community, a woman whose presence was as constant as the changing seasons. With her sun-kissed hair perpetually tied back in a messy bun and an expression that oscillated between determination and defiance, she radiated a fierce independence that many admired. In her late 30s, Karen had grown up just a few miles from the lake, her childhood filled with memories of swimming and fishing alongside friends. Yet, beneath the surface of her vibrant personality lay complexities that often went unnoticed. A small business owner, Karen had poured her heart into her landscaping company, which thrived on the promise of transforming dull spaces into lush paradises. However, as demand grew, so did her stress levels. A constant struggle to keep up with orders and manage finances began to weigh heavily on her shoulders. Despite her charming demeanor, shades of desperation lurked in her eyes, revealing a woman grappling with the pressures of adulthood and financial stability. Her motivations for dumping chemicals into the lake were rooted in this mounting pressure point. One fateful evening, burdened by overdue supplies and the threat of losing clients, she made a choice that would alter the course of her life forever. Believing that no one would notice if she disposed of leftover fertilizers and pesticides in the waterway. After all, she had seen others do worse without consequence. Karen felt justified in her actions. It was a calculated risk she thought might buy her some time. Initially, she felt a fleeting sense of relief, thinking she had found a quick solution to her problems. But deep down, guilt gnawed at her conscience, reminding her of the lake's importance to the community and its delicate ecosystem. As days turned into weeks, whispers began to circulate about mysterious changes in the water, a distant warning that would eventually trigger an avalanche of consequences. Little did Karen know that this single act of desperation would ignite a storm not only for herself, but also for everyone around her. The fallout was imminent, and soon enough, it would become clear that no one could escape the repercussions of such a toxic decision. It was a sweltering afternoon when Karen faced the cumulative weight of her choices. The landscaping business she had nurtured was floundering under the strain of unpaid invoices and dwindling supplies, with pressure mounting to fulfill a large order that could save her business. She found herself staring at a collection of hazardous chemicals left over from previous projects. Fertilizers containing nitrogen and phosphorus, and pesticides laced with powerful insecticides. Each substance, potent in its intended application, also bore the weight of her desperation. As she stood in her cluttered garage, surrounded by bags labeled with warnings that now felt like distant echoes, an idea began to form. feeding into her anxiety. Would it really hurt to get rid of these excess chemicals in one fell swoop? The lake was nearby. After all, a vast expanse of water she often visited. She recalled a time when it served as a backdrop for laughter and joy rather than looming responsibility. Clouded by the urgency to solve her financial woes, Karen consoled herself with the thought that others had done similar things without consequences. They wouldn't notice, right? After all, it wasn't as if pollutants were something very few people could see. Taking a deep breath filled with both dread and resolve, she loaded the chemicals into her truck under the veil of dusk, driving down the familiar dirt road leading to the lake. Karen felt both exhilarated and terrified as she reached the water's edge. Twilight settled around her like a heavy blanket. She scanned the area, assuring herself that no one was around to witness her actions. With trembling hands, she opened each bag and poured its contents into the water, a slick cascade of man-made toxins contaminating what had once been pure and life-sustaining. In that moment of recklessness, Karen felt an intoxicating blend of relief and guilt wash over her. The burden of immediate problems seemed lighter as the chemicals swirled away from her own reality and into the depths of the lake. Little did she know that this catastrophic decision would soon unravel everything she had worked for, setting off a chain reaction that would shake her community to its core. The following morning, the lake's surface appeared eerily still. A deceptive calm that belied the chaos lurking beneath. As sunlight broke through the trees, it illuminated the water in a way that felt almost surreal. Shimmering hues of green and brown hinted at something amiss. Locals who came to enjoy their daily routine began to notice subtle changes that sent ripples of concern through the community. Marla, an avid birdwatcher, was among the first to raise alarm. She arrived with her binoculars, expecting to catch sight of the vibrant wildlife that usually thrived along the shores. Instead, she found patches of algae clinging stubbornly to the water's edge, an unusual sight for this once pristine lake. The usual chorus of frogs and birds had quieted, replaced by an unsettling silence that made her uneasy. Others soon joined Marla in her observations. Children who splashed gleefully in the shallows now hesitated at the water's edge, their parents expressing worry over potential health risks. Fishermen reported fewer catches than usual, their lines coming up empty while they exchanged bewildered glances. That a sense of foreboding settled over the community as they whispered about what could be causing these changes. Word spread quickly through town, and by midday, groups gathered at the lakeside, exchanging theories and concerns. Some speculated about recent storms stirring up sediment. Others suggested more sinister explanations. Karen, unaware of the escalating tension around her actions, went about her day with a growing sense of anxiety gnawing at her gut. As locals compared notes on their observations, a few began to connect the dots back to Karen's landscaping business and her struggle with chemicals. Rumors swirled about possible contamination from unknown sources. Fingers pointed subtly but firmly toward her name. A community meeting was soon organized to address growing concerns over water quality and safety. A meeting Karen would dread but could no longer avoid. With each passing hour, what started as an impulsive decision was rapidly evolving into a communal crisis that would soon attract attention far beyond their quiet town. The lake was no longer just a scenic landmark. It had become a battleground for accountability and environmental protection. As the sun set on that fateful day, the community's growing unease began to coalesce into action. It was Marla again who took the lead, her instincts honed by years of observing the lake's rhythms. Driven by concern for the wildlife she loved, she decided to document her findings. Armed with her notebook and camera, she ventured back to the lake, determined to capture evidence of the changes that had taken root. Marla's photographs revealed unsettling truths. The patches of algae spread wider than she first observed, and the water itself appeared murkier. She captured images of dead fish bobbing at the surface, an alarming sight that made her stomach turn. With her notes in hand, she sought out other concerned citizens. It wasn't long before a small group formed, each person sharing their own observations and worries about the previously vibrant ecosystem. Among them was Tom, a veteran fisherman who had frequented the lake for decades. He noticed a sharp decline in his usual catches. On that day, he hadn't pulled in a single fish, His stories of childhood summers on the water echoed through the gathering. It was evident they shared a common love for this cherished landmark. He voiced his concerns about the implications for local families relying on fishing as a source of food. Fueled by mounting evidence and concern, Marla and Tom organized an informal meeting at the community center. Word spread. More residents flocked to share their experiences, drawing connections between the lake's health and Karen's recent troubles with her landscaping business. The atmosphere grew rife with speculation as people pieced together what they believed had transpired. Tensions flared during discussions, some advocating for immediate action while others called for careful investigation. Karen's name surfaced repeatedly. The realization that their neighbor might be behind these environmental changes sent shockwaves through the crowd. Fueled by both community spirit and righteous indignation, they resolved to take their findings to local authorities. While they began drafting a formal complaint, little did they know that their inquiry would soon attract attention beyond their quiet town, eventually bringing in environmental agencies eager to address this emerging crisis. The path seemed set for consequences nobody could have fully anticipated. With the community's concerns escalating, Marla and Tom gathered the evidence they had compiled, including photographs, testimonies, and documented changes in the ecosystem. They decided to formally file reports with the local environmental authority, feeling it was their duty to not only protect the lake, but also to hold someone accountable for its deteriorating condition. The process began with a visit to the local office where officials listened attentively as Marla laid out her observations. "We need action," she insisted, showing them images of algae-laden water and dead fish. The gravity of her findings prompted officials to take immediate interest, launching an internal inquiry into the lake's health and potential contaminants. Within days, environmental inspectors were dispatched to assess the situation firsthand. Armed with water testing kits and sampling equipment, they moved along the shoreline, collecting samples while documenting everything they found. They tested for chemical pollutants. Tension hung in the air. The community watched closely, anxious for results that could confirm their fears. Meanwhile, whispers of what was happening reached beyond the town's borders. Reports filed locally were soon elevated via regional channels, leading to a more extensive investigation. As scrutiny heightened, state environmental agencies became involved. They recognized that this issue could represent a larger environmental crisis affecting not just one lake, but potentially influencing surrounding waterways and ecosystems. Not long after, word spread that the EPA had been contacted and would be taking over oversight of the investigation. For Karen, news of federal involvement hit like a thunderclap. She had been oblivious to how quickly her isolated decision was spiraling into an all-out examination of her actions. Reports came in indicating elevated levels of harmful chemicals in the water. Local media caught wind of the story. Headlines blared about pollution in a cherished community lake linked to a local business owner. The pressure mounted not just on Karen, but also on town officials as managers faced demands from residents for accountability and urgent corrective measures. Little did she know that this escalation would bring forth not just investigations, but sweeping scrutiny into her business practices. The once familiar landscape had rapidly transformed into a battleground of legal ramifications, environmental justice, and community outrage, an unexpected whirlwind that would change everything she knew. As news of the EPA's investigation hit, Karen felt as if the ground beneath her was crumbling. Initially, denial shielded her from the reality of her actions. "This can't be about me," she muttered, recalling the earlier warmth of her community, the warmth she believed could insulate her from blame. In her mind, the lake had always been a backdrop to her life rather than a vulnerable ecosystem now bearing the consequences of her poor choices. Karen's first instinct was to downplay her role in the situation. She quickly approached friends and neighbors, insisting that it was simply a misunderstanding, a coincidence that the lake had started showing signs of distress after she dumped chemicals rather than a direct result of her actions. "It's probably just nature acting up," she would say with an air of confidence that belied her shaky demeanor. With each denial, however, she noticed a chill creeping into conversations. Laughter quickly faded when she entered rooms. Whispers turned into pointed discussions among townsfolk about the possibility of contamination linked to her. Karen felt increasingly isolated. They don't really believe I would do something like that, she thought desperately, yet troubling thoughts gnawed at her. Evidence was mounting, and their trust seemed to evaporate as rapidly as the sunlight on the lake's surface. The community meeting conducted by Marla and Tom hardened sentiments against her. A collective sense of betrayal emerged among those who had once stood by her through thick and thin. Ex-neighbors who used to chat amicably now avoided eye contact, their expressions betraying disappointment and disbelief. For Karen, not only was she seeing a loss of community support, but also friendships fracturing before her eyes. Feeling desperate and misunderstood, Karen resorted to casting suspicions back onto others in the community, suggesting someone else had caused the damage, perhaps through negligence or reckless behavior. Each accusation only fueled further discord. What had once been friendly camaraderie now felt adversarial. In this chaotic swirl of emotion and denial, Karen found herself on an abrupt path towards self-destruction. Instead of facing accountability for her actions, she buried herself deeper in a web of lies that only distanced her from those who might have offered help or understanding. The reality was crashing down around her. This wasn't just about one decision, but rather an unraveling of both relationships and self-worth. A toxic disaster with repercussions reaching far beyond the water's edge. The fallout from Karen's actions reverberated throughout the community like a thunderclap, sparking outrage that grew stronger with each passing day. Local residents, once united in their affection for the lake, now found themselves gripped by fears for both their health and the environment. Parents worried about letting their children play near the water, while anglers lamented the loss of their favorite fishing spots. Once teeming with life, now sullied by doubt. By the end of the week, a palpable anger swelled among the townsfolk as they gathered in response to the unfolding crisis. Marla and Tom led the charge, rallying neighbors who felt betrayed and incensed by Karen's actions. "We need to stand together," Marla urged at a gathering in the community center. "Not just for ourselves, but for the lake and everything it represents." Fueled by mounting anxiety and a collective desire for accountability, they began organizing protests and petitions demanding action. Within days, several hundred residents had signed a petition calling for stricter regulations on chemical disposal and immediate action to restore the lake's health. Posters were plastered around town declaring, "Protect our lake," and "Justice for our waters." While social media became a platform for sharing updates and venting frustrations, the once bustling local cafe transformed into a hub of activism, with community members strategizing over coffee cups about how best to confront the situation. Protests erupted at town hall meetings, where residents passionately voiced their concerns to local officials. "This isn't just about one person. It's about our environment, our health," shouted one speaker as applause erupted from the crowd. As anger boiled over, calls for transparency grew louder. Citizens demanded to know what measures would be taken against Karen and what was being done to ensure that such negligence would never happen again. Karen, meanwhile, felt the weight of this collective fury bearing down on her, no longer able to hide in denial or place blame elsewhere. She realized she was now viewed as a pariah in her own community. The camaraderie that had once defined her life was replaced by a palpable tension. Old friends turned away, while new faces regarded her with suspicion. As protests continued to escalate, it became evident that this was not just a fight for environmental justice, but also a powerful assertion of community values, a united front determined to protect what they held dear. Their resolve was clear. They would not let this incident fade quietly into memory. They would hold Karen accountable for her actions and reclaim their precious lake from the brink of disaster. The investigation by the EPA intensified. Karen's reality began to shift dramatically. Legal ramifications loomed heavily over her, threatening not just her business, but also her freedom. The agency had already gathered substantial evidence against her, including water samples that revealed alarming levels of hazardous chemicals in the lake. These findings painted a clear picture of environmental negligence and wrongdoing. Establishing potential violations of the Clean Water Act, the EPA informed Karen that she could face serious legal repercussions. Fines for improper disposal of toxic waste could reach into six figures, depending on the severity of the contamination and the extent of restoration required. Furthermore, as communities across the nation pushed for stricter environmental enforcement, public outcry would undoubtedly influence the outcome of any legal proceedings against her. Karen received an ominous letter detailing the charges she might face: willful negligence, criminal dumping, and even endangerment of public health. Each term felt like a weight added to her chest, a reminder that each decision she'd made was leading her further from the person she once was, a respected business owner and friend. The potential for criminal charges sent a chilling shiver down her spine. She had never imagined she would find herself in a situation where she could be considered a criminal, facing court appearances and the possibility of jail time. As whispers of her predicament spread through town, even cautioning words from former friends turned into heavy stones in her backpack of guilt. In addition to potential fines and charges, Karen faced the likelihood of civil lawsuits from community members seeking damages for lost access to the lake, health concerns, and emotional distress. Anglers who had enjoyed their peaceful days fishing were particularly vocal about seeking justice for what had been done to their cherished spot. With each passing hour, her situation became more dire. The pressure crept into her daily life, every conversation now tinged with suspicion or disdain, even as Karen considered legal counsel to help navigate the quagmire she found herself in. She couldn't shake the growing sense of hopelessness. As court dates loomed on the horizon and community protests continued outside her home, it became glaringly obvious that there was no way for her to escape the consequences of her actions. Instead, she'd have to confront them head-on, a tumultuous journey she had never anticipated embarking upon. The stakes were perilously high, not just for her livelihood, but for her very identity. The aftermath of Karen's chemical dumping began to unveil a grim reality for the lake's ecosystem. The once vibrant waters, home to a kaleidoscope of aquatic life, now bore the heavy burden of contamination. Algal blooms proliferated across the surface, creating a thick green mat that suffocated the water and blocked sunlight from reaching submerged plants. As these blooms thrived on the excess nutrients from fertilizers, they produced toxins harmful to both wildlife and humans. Fish populations plummeted as species like bass and trout began to suffer from oxygen depletion caused by decaying algae. Fishermen reported their lines coming up empty. What was once a fruitful fishing spot became a haunting reminder of loss, with dead fish appearing along the shores, a grim testament to the lake's deteriorating health. Local residents who had enjoyed fishing with their families now watched in despair as their cherished pastime vanished. Birds that relied on the lake for sustenance were also affected. The absence of fish led to fewer herons and egrets hunting along the banks, while migratory birds that typically rested in the area now passed it by without so much as a glance. The delicate balance of the ecosystem shattered, leaving behind a void where life had once flourished. To compound these ecological issues, the potential long-term effects of chemical accumulation were becoming increasingly concerning. Heavy metals and synthetic compounds from pesticides could seep into the soil and groundwater, posing risks not only to wildlife but also to local residents who depended on these natural resources for their drinking water and irrigation. As scientists began conducting further analyses, they discovered that some toxins could persist for years, creating a legacy of pollution that might haunt future generations, with every test revealing higher levels of contaminants in both water and sediment samples. It became clear that recovery would require significant intervention and resources, not just from local authorities but possibly state and federal agencies as well. The community's fears materialized into reality. A beloved lake transformed into an ecological disaster zone due to one reckless decision. Now, as residents rallied for restoration efforts, they faced the daunting task of healing not only their environment, but also rebuilding trust in each other, an endeavor that would take time, commitment, and an unwavering resolve to prevent such negligence in the future. With the weight of her actions bearing down on her, Karen's life spiraled into chaos. The goodwill she once enjoyed in the community dissipated like fog under the rising sun, leaving behind the stark reality of isolation. Friends who had been part of her support network began to distance themselves, whispering behind closed doors and avoiding eye contact whenever they crossed paths. The camaraderie that had defined her social life was replaced by awkward silence and judgment. The financial repercussions were equally devastating. Business inquiries dwindled as word spread about the EPA investigation. Potential clients hesitated to engage with a company entangled in controversy. The simple act of answering the phone became a painful reminder of her failure. Where there were once enthusiastic conversations about landscaping designs, there were now only muffled refusals and disinterested hang-ups. Bills began piling up, and soon Karen found herself living in an ever-tightening financial chokehold. Late fees and unpaid invoices compounded each other. A reflection of her crumbling empire, Karen's mental health deteriorated alongside her professional life. Guilt washed over her with every thought of the lake and its once thriving ecosystem. The memories of family picnics by the shore now haunted her nights. Sleep evaded her as anxiety gnawed at her mind. Every creak in the house felt like a judgment, and every outdated news report served as a reminder of betrayal. She began isolating herself, shying away from friends who still reached out, fearing their pity or condemnation that AS small-town life moved forward without her. Karen's reputation took a beating both publicly and privately. Rumors transformed into malicious gossip that twisted the narrative around her actions further, branding her as a villain rather than painting her as a desperate person who'd made a poor decision under pressure. Even casual acquaintances started treating her with hostility. Familiar faces became blank masks held high against the possibility of connection that in this personal fallout. Karen faced an uphill battle not just to salvage what remained of her business, but also to reclaim any sense of normalcy in relationships that had defined her identity for years. Continual reminders of what she had lost left scars deeper than any legal penalty she faced. What was once vibrant and fruitful had become waning shadows, a daunting realization that would shadow her footsteps until she could confront both herself and the consequences of those fateful moments by the lake. The journey ahead seemed uncertain, fraught with challenges that would test both resolve and endurance as she confronted the shattered pieces of her former life. In the wake of the ecological disaster, the community found a renewed sense of purpose, rallying together for the restoration of their beloved lake. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, residents organized cleanup efforts that brought people from all walks of life together, united by their shared goal of healing the environment. Local schools, businesses, and environmental organizations joined forces to launch a campaign for both immediate and long-term recovery. Volunteers donned gloves and boots, armed with trash bags and nets to collect debris from the lakeshore. Children laughed as they participated in educational programs about the importance of protecting natural resources, learning firsthand about the delicate balance of ecosystems. Marla and Tom spearheaded these efforts, encouraging residents to share their stories and connect with one another over their common love for the lake. AS community members worked side by side. They began to foster relationships that had been strained by recent events. Conversations shifted from blame to collaboration. Ideas flowed freely about how to advocate for stricter environmental regulations and promote sustainable practices in daily life. Together, they drafted proposals for local policymakers, urging them to implement new guidelines for chemical use and disposal, ensuring that no one would ever again face such devastation. Social media became a powerful tool for raising awareness beyond their town's borders. The hashtag Restore Our Lake gained traction, drawing attention from environmental advocates and organizations eager to support their cause. Fundraising events were organized to secure resources for ongoing restoration efforts, with benefits like bake sales and local concerts highlighting the community's resilience. As the cleanup progressed, evidence of recovery began to emerge. Water testing showed signs of improvement. Fish populations slowly started to return, and birds once again graced the shores. The community felt a growing sense of hope as they worked not only to restore the physical environment but also to rebuild trust within their ranks. Through collective action and unwavering commitment to protect their natural heritage, residents transformed tragedy into opportunity. They not only healed their lake but also revitalized their community spirit, a testament to the power of unity in overcoming adversity. As they looked toward a brighter future, they did so with the knowledge that vigilance was key. They would remain stewards of their environment, dedicated to preventing such negligence from ever occurring again. In the wake of the environmental catastrophe, both Karen and the community emerged with profound lessons about accountability and stewardship. For Karen, the ordeal highlighted the dire consequences of overlooking environmental responsibility. She learned that actions driven by desperation could lead to irreversible damage, not just to ecosystems, but also to relationships and personal integrity. The isolation she experienced was a stark reminder that one's choices resonate far beyond individual circumstances, impacting an entire community. The experience forced Karen to confront her own values and priorities. As she witnessed the community rallying together to heal the lake, she recognized the importance of environmental stewardship, not just as a duty, but as a shared commitment to protect their collective home. The struggle had reshaped her understanding of what it means to be a responsible member of society, igniting a desire within her to advocate for sustainable practices moving forward. For the community, this crisis served as an urgent wake-up call. Residents learned that vigilance is essential in safeguarding their environment. They realized that complacency could lead to devastating consequences, much like what they experienced with Karen's reckless actions. The collective effort to clean up the lake fostered a deeper appreciation for their natural surroundings and emphasized the significance of proactive engagement. Through workshops and educational initiatives, residents began sharing knowledge about sustainable practices and environmental protection measures. They established programs in local schools, ensuring that future generations understood the value of their ecological heritage. The hashtag Restore Our Lake not only became a rallying cry for restoration but also represented a movement towards greater awareness and responsibility. Moreover, the events inspired local leaders to implement stricter regulations on chemical usage and waste disposal, reinforcing accountability within businesses and encouraging environmentally friendly practices. This shift marked a transformative moment for the community as they collectively embraced their role as stewards of the environment. Ultimately, Karen's actions set off a chain reaction that led not only to personal consequences but also to significant community growth and resilience. Both she and her neighbors emerged from this ordeal with renewed convictions about protecting their environment. Understanding that accountability is fundamental in preserving their cherished lake for generations to come, they learned that healing is possible through cooperation and that every individual has a part to play in fostering a sustainable future. The journey from tranquility to chaos began with one reckless decision, leading to a devastating environmental crisis that affected not only the lake but the entire community. Karen's failure to recognize the consequences of her actions resulted in ecological destruction, isolation, and profound personal turmoil. As the crisis unfolded, it catalyzed a wave of outrage and mobilization among community members who refused to let their beloved lake be sacrificed to negligence. Determined to reclaim their environment, residents transformed their anger into action, uniting to restore the lake and raise awareness about the importance of ecological stewardship. Through cleanup efforts and educational initiatives, they not only worked towards healing the damaged ecosystem but also reinforced their commitment to vigilance and protecting their natural resources. This collective effort fostered a renewed sense of community, emphasizing the strength found in unity and shared purpose. Lessons learned echoed throughout the town. Individuals realized that complacency could lead to dire consequences, while Karen came to understand that accountability is essential in fostering trust within a community. The consequences she faced served as a grim reminder of the impact one person's choices can have on many, a realization that instilled a deeper respect for environmental responsibility among residents. Looking ahead, the community embraced its role as caretakers of the lake, with new regulations implemented to prevent future irresponsibility. The experience prompted ongoing discussions surrounding eco-conscious practices, ensuring that future generations would learn from past mistakes. As they worked together to heal both the physical landscape and their relationships, hope blossomed where despair once reigned. With every bag of garbage cleared, every fish returned to healthier waters, and every child educated about preserving nature, they reclaimed what was lost, transforming tragedy into triumph. In summation, this journey reflects the resilience of both Karen and her community in navigating the fallout of a single poor choice. From chaos emerged clarity, a steadfast commitment towards protecting their environment and each other. A narrative where healing is always possible when accountability is embraced and vigilance is maintained. They emerged not just as survivors of an ecological disaster, but as champion stewards ready to ensure that such an incident would never occur again.